Hey everybody, it's Mike, and welcome to Chip Damage. And today's topic is going to be a little different. Today's topic is simply, what are my favorite video games? Yes, even though I am definitely a collector, I do not see video games as simply trinkets, bobbits, and treasures to put on a shelf and never experience. No, I love to play as many of the games in my collection as possible, and I always kind of gravitate towards games that I think I'm going to like or at least be interested in. And many of these games throughout my life have been very important to me, very near and dear to my heart, whether they be in a story context, just a gameplay experience context, memories I've had with people playing them. Yeah, gaming has been a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember. And even though the internet is generally terrible, I find that one of the best things about it is that, you know, when you are in the gaming media, when you like gaming media, I should say, one of my favorite things to do is when that you see that collectors and YouTubers and streamers that you like watching, that you are entertained by, when you find that they enjoy the same type of games that you do, you know, when they have a similar type of experience with those games, and sometimes they have an entirely like outside context game that you've never heard of and you want to check out because you know that you generally like what they like. And I think that's great. Like I said, the internet is a horrible place, but I must say that it is good for kind of building a long distance community because you know what? Hardcore gamers, gamer collectors, people really appreciate games. Maybe they're spread pretty thin out there, and you know, you may not have some in your immediate friend group, so you go online, and it's kind of nice to be able to connect in some way, some small way, with people that you're entertained by, you know, that you connect with by knowing that they like the same things that you do. So with that in mind, I kind of wanted to make a video going through some of my favorite games. I'm going to go chronologically, kind of from like the oldest memories I have to the newest systems, and kind of talk about the tentpole games that really kind of define my gaming life, my gaming career, if you will. And of course, it cannot be a comprehensive list because there's just far too many games out there that I've played. I'm quite old, guys. I've been playing games for over 30 years, so I can't hit everyone. But I wanted to hit, like I said, the big tentpoles that kind of define what I think of when I think of gaming. You know, if I'm in a bad mood or if I'm not in a great place, I think of these experiences and they can perk me right back up. Whether the memory of them does it or I go and play them, it'll just, you know, make me happy, take me back to that place. And of course, I want to know, what are your guys' favorite games? You know, I want to know, these games that are your favorites. Have you never tried them? What are your experiences with them? What are some games I should check out? Because that's like one of my favorite things about gaming in general as I get older is the community of memories, whether it be entirely different than yours so you can learn something new, or the shared experiences that we all had playing games in our basements as kids. So let me get the YouTube stuff out of the way. If you like what you're about to see, please like, subscribe, and check out my old videos. And without further ado, let's jump into it, shall we? So let's start in the very, you know, earliest memories that I have. You know, when I was a kid, I have some old photos of me playing like pinball on NES with my father. Can't remember that far back, but I'm the youngest on both sides of my family. My family is quite large. I have a brother who's 10 years older than me and cousins who are all much older than me. And there was always an NES laying around. And my favorite NES games, without question, are what you're about to see here, and that is in fact the Castlevania games. What I'm holding here is the recently released limited run Castlevania collection. Now, I always loved Mario 1, 2, and 3, absolutely. Zelda as a kid is rough for me. As some of you may know, I like Zelda, but I've never been the most diehard Zelda fan because when you're like 3 or 4 or 5 and you play Zelda 1, you don't know where to go. You're just rubbing up against walls. Castlevania was like go forward and kill monsters, and that was always super, super fun to me. You know, however, that I never had an NES myself at that time. That was, you know, right before I was born. That was always like the older kids things. However, one of the first system that I had, and many of you will know this, was the Sega Genesis, which I was allowed to choose when I was a kid. What did I want, the Super Nintendo or the Sega Genesis when I was finally old enough? And there was a big reason why I chose the Genesis, and that is one of the earliest gaming memories I have is playing this gem right here, Miss Pac-Man. Yes, if you were to say, what game do you remember playing the earliest in your life? It was like arcade and Sega Genesis, Miss Pac-Man. I got a godfather who had this on the Genesis after I played it in an arcade. I'm like, oh no, I love this game, particularly Miss Pac-Man, like because it had 2-player and you can mess with the speed, which you couldn't do in a lot of versions of the old Pac-Man. So I'm like, yeah, I want the Sega Genesis, mostly because I wanted to play Miss Pac-Man. Like I said, I had an older brother, 10 years older than me, who was really into sports, and he saw that, and we lived separately. We were half brothers. He lived with his mom, I lived with my mom. And he knew that I was getting a Genesis, and he helped his little brother out. He got him a gift, right? He gave him this gem right here, Sonic the Hedgehog. And that was it, guys. As you know, I'm a huge Sonic fan throughout my entire life to this day, and it all started right there. So thank you, brother, for gifting me this game, because this was a huge influence. Of course, I had played Mario, but guys, you have to take yourself back to like the very early 90s. While I loved Mario, the sheer spectacle of Sonic at the time, to a young brain, to anyone's brain, was like beyond belief. Yeah, it was really fast, and the music was just so sick. And the fact that it was like, you know, a lot of people like, oh, why do you like Sonic? Because he's like an edgy character and all this stuff, and he was more extreme. Like when I'm 4 years old, 3 years old, that didn't matter. What I really liked was it was fun to run and jump with Sonic, and he had more of a pinball feeling than Mario. The old Marios 1, 2, and 3 are pretty tough games. Sonic was more like run to the right, and there's more variety than the NES games like Mario, which was basically just the same few stages over and over again. So Sonic, like kind of like the bright colors and that freeform movement, that pinball aesthetic, I loved it. I love it to this day. And of course, you know, there would be many more great Genesis Sonic games up to 2 and 3, but I remember in particular Sonic and Knuckles coming out in '94 was just like a revelation. I loved Knuckles. I loved Tails was cool, but like you know, he's basically easy mode. Knuckles was like a whole different path, gliding and climbing, and the lock-on technology with Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. This was like the #1 game I wanted as a kid. I could not find it for the life of me. You know, this game sold out everywhere, like the Christmas that I wanted it. So I had to just keep renting it for like a year, or like it felt like forever, for months, until my parents finally got it for me for a birthday or Christmas. I can't quite remember. And yeah, Sonic and Knuckles, the whole Sonic franchise on Genesis, still great, still hold up. Those physics are fantastic. However, one of the first games that I was gifted when I got my Genesis was in this gem right here that a lot of people may not know, but it is great, but it is, and that is the first Vector Man game. Yes, I love this game. I think this game is single-handedly responsible why I always like games automatically that have a double jump. Vector Man, well, what is this? It's kind of like this pre-rendered, like in terms of visuals, kind of to compete with Nintendo's Donkey Kong Country at the time. Game where you play as like this robot made out of glowing green balls who can shoot blast out of his palm a la Mega Man and gets power up, and you gotta like fight through an army of robots to defeat a master robot that's taken over the world. Basic and fair, but I love this game. It had a certain attitude. The control was through the roof. They made a sequel that was just as good, but way harder. Vector Man is something that is near and dear to my heart. It's a Sega IP that I don't think will ever come back. I don't think it would work in the modern day, but back then this game meant the world to me. Like, I actually know this game by touch. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think I know this game better. Like, I've gone through and beaten it more times than even Sonic 1, because I think I had it before Sonic 1. Vector Man, love this game, near and dear to my heart. And sticking on Genesis in that era, that early 90s era, guys, I am a millennial, and do you know what we all agree on in my age is that X-Men are cooler than the Avengers. I know for my younger viewers out there, the Avengers may be the face of Marvel. No. That's for you youngins. For us, it was Spider-Man and these guys right here, the X-Men. And X-Men had tons and tons of great games made by Capcom on the Super Nintendo. There were games on the NES, and there was a part 1 of this game right here on the Genesis. But this game in particular, X-Men 2 Clone Wars on the Genesis, is like one of my favorite games of all time, like to this day. And what is this? So basically, it's just a side-scrolling platform where you could play from a multitude of the X-Men. If there was like Beast, Cyclops, Gambit, Psylocke, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and you can unlock Magneto. This game just kind of had it all. Like, you know, the Capcom games kind of restricted the amount you could use your powers. Not this. You can go nuts with this. And you know, that whole time, like that whole era of early 90s was just like Sega and the X-Men was like a perfect marriage. And this is one of the reasons that I truly hate Disney. Whether you love like their new movies, how they've handled Star Wars and Marvel is, you know, up into interpretation, but their gaming division is a joke compared to what it was. There used to be so many great Marvel games, a lot of bad ones too, but the gems that were out there were incredible, and Disney is incredibly slow to re-release them in modern platforms, if at all, especially on the X-Men front. So if you have a Genesis, if you want some good X-Men action, X-Men 2 Clone Wars, I can't say enough good about it. But that's not to say I didn't love the Super Nintendo. I literally had like a storybook life as a kid in the gaming sense. I had a Genesis, and literally across the street was my best friend the same age who had a Super Nintendo. And let me tell you something, guys, the console wars, that was a real thing, you know, but it wasn't like you couldn't hang out with each other. And what ended up happening mostly is like, yeah, once in a while you argue what's better, the Genesis, the SNES. But the real thing you do as friends is you coordinate what you're going to get, and you both enjoy both. All right, it's a Genesis day. We're going to go over to my house, play Sonic, X-Men, Vector Man, what have you. But if it's a Super Nintendo day, we go over to my best friend's house, and that's where I encountered my favorite Super Nintendo games, which I don't have on hand at the moment. That would have to be Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2. I can never debate. I always debate with myself which one I like more. Donkey Kong 1 has Diddy and Donkey Kong, and I like the jungle aesthetic a little more. Donkey Kong Country 2 has Diddy and Dixie and controls a little better. It's a little more polished, but it's like it's way harder, so it's a little harder to enjoy. And I don't like I love the pirate aesthetic, but I kind of like the jungle aesthetic a little bit more. I can never tell which one I like more. Mega Man X, also one of my favorite Super Nintendo games. And even though I didn't play it on the console at the time, Final Fantasy VI is my favorite 2D RPG of all time, closely followed by Chrono Trigger. Super Nintendo really, really killed it. But like I said, I was a Sega kid growing up, so in a unique situation, I was one of the very few who wanted a Sega Saturn in the United States growing up. And, you know, I was very alone in that. And what do all kids who have a Saturn talk about? What was the killer app? And that's this gem right here, Nights into Dreams. There was no new mainline Sonic on the Saturn, but Sonic Team did put out a gem. And that's this game right here. I'm going to slow it down a little bit to talk about this one, because in my heart of hearts, the game that kind of makes me smile the most, my happiest, my number one, like, the game closest to my heart, I'd actually have to say it's this game. There's something about the whimsical nature of this game. There's almost no voice acting. And the fact that it's about two kids who are losers in in their waking lives. They fall asleep and they're selected by this character Knights here to kind of save the dream world. And by doing that, they find the confidence to succeed in their waking lives. And they also meet each other through their dreams. It has a very dreamlike quality to it because it is entirely carried by its incredible soundtrack, its incredible vistas, even to this day. Nights is something, a true expression of creativity and what games could be. As corny as it sounds, games can be worlds that are just our dreams translated into visuals. And I think Nights captures that. If I hear like Dream Dreams or any of the themes from this, I immediately like tear up because this game meant the world to me. Yeah, you could beat it in like an hour, but like going through it and doing better and seeing the secrets and the little Easter eggs and kind of that old Sonic Team whimsy translate into another game. Yes, like Nights into Dreams, just absolutely fantastic. I can't say enough about it. And of course, I have the bonus Christmas Nights, which was a giveaway. We could play as Sonic in Nights' world. That was even specialer, but that was special in itself. And yeah, guys, in a weird way, Nights is like my number one like game that touches my heart. The game that I think of like, this is the best of gaming. Even like there's like an often quoted thing that Shigeru Miyamoto, of all the things, he's jealous that he didn't create Nights because he's a creator, and even though he's like a crazy old guy now, that understands like simplicity in gaming can be a beautiful thing. And I think that Nights really encapsulates that. Yet again though, Saturn was great. My buddy across the street got the N64. And, so we got to compare and contrast there. Well, I got games like Nights, and I got Tomb Raider on Saturn and a few fighting games. He had the N64, and I do love the N64 quite a bit. Maybe not as much as many people who live in the US because there's so many diehards here. Of course, I love Mario 64. However, when it comes to the topic of the first-person shooters, I was actually never a tremendous fan of GoldenEye. I think GoldenEye was cool, but that's because I was a kid who loved dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, and the Turok series, in particular Turok 2, Seeds of Evil, were like just so much cooler to me. The weapon variety was absolutely insane, even in multiplayer. The enemy variety was insane, fighting monsters and aliens and dinosaurs and demons. Like, this game was just so cool to me. I was a huge fan right around this time of PC shooters. Like, I had Doom and Quake and Alien vs. Predator on PC, and I found that something like Turok was the most close to that, but I could play it multiplayer locally with my buddies. So Turok 1 and 2 were huge to me. On N64, something I don't have on hand at the moment that I also loved was a hidden gem known as Mischief Makers. 2D games were rare on the N64. My buddy rented it. I loved it. But we played a lot of Smash Brothers and Blast Corps and all those big titles. Yet again, Ocarina of Time, when I was a kid, when I was like 9 or 10 when that came out, I liked it, but like we were kids, right? So like the fact that you couldn't jump like on command, like really made us mad. we're like, oh, so much of this could be solved if you could just jump. So I know that's simple, but when you're 9 and like you're playing Mario 64 and then you hop in Ocarina, we didn't want to play it at first. It took us like forever to actually start playing that game because we're like, oh, you can't jump. Let's just play Mario 64 and then later like Banjo and all this stuff. Of course, we recognized its quality later, but for years it was like we'd play some game. Like, do you want to play Turok 2? I'm like, yeah, let's play Turok 2 with all the cheats. And man, I love Turok 2 and Mischief Makers. Yet again, late 90s though, right as fate would have it, me and my best friend lived across the street from each other. There was another kid who moved in on the same block as him that had a PS1. So literally in a straight line, it was like Sega Saturn and 64 and PS1, which as a kid, I didn't have huge exposure to. But I just want to kind of, we'll circle back around this later, but these were my first experiences with two of my favorite games of all time, Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid. And yeah, we're gonna come back to Metal Gear in a little bit. But let's talk about Final Fantasy VII real quick. Yes, it is trite in the gaming sphere to say that Final Fantasy VII is one of your favorite games, especially in like, oh, it's your favorite Final Fantasy. That's just the popular answer. You didn't play the others. Well, the fact of the matter is, like, I have played them all at this point. And Final Fantasy VII to me, more than just for nostalgic purpose, because I only really saw this game as a kid, but I didn't actually play it myself until about 2004, 8 years later. And 7, almost 8 years later, and it held up like wonderfully. This game means so much to so many. So, you know, I don't want to rabble on too much about it, but what I can just tell you is that even though it was limited at the time by its technology, even at the time it came out and a few years after, you could tell like they were little, you know, you mostly control little Lego people. Somehow the creators were able to pour so much character and carry the story on its soundtrack and its text dialogue. There's no voices. These little mute Lego people emoted so much. They were able to connect to an entire generation of gamers. And one of my favorite, more recent memories, my 30-year-old friend who had never played this game, where like, you know, 2 years ago, played this for the first time. He had played plenty of RPGs, JRPGs, but was more on the Nintendo side of things, and just kind of missed this one. Didn't know the story somehow. Just like was entirely blind to Final Fantasy VII story. He came back to me after I lent him the game, or he downloaded the more recent version on PS4. And he's like, "This is one of my favorite games of all time." Kind of proved to me that it does hold up. I think that the kind of science fantasy aesthetic of this, very popular at the time in the 90s, all the way from like Akira up till now, kind of like that cyberpunk mixed with some magic aesthetic holds up. I think the music is the best in the whole franchise. And while I think many of the Final Fantasy games, 6, 9, and 10 in particular, are my favorites in the whole franchise, there's something about 7 that it has such a sweet sorrow to it. I think 6 through 10 in particular have very somber stories, very sad stories. And I think that connects to people like me who may have not had the easiest time growing up, or anyone who's had a rough time growing up. You know, and kind of comes together with a group of friends and finds a community there. I think 7 really exemplifies that fantastically. Like I said, with nothing more than mute little Lego characters, which is a miracle in itself. I can go back and play this game, and even on the gameplay side, Materia, one of the most flexible, most fun kind of gameplay magic systems out there. Final Fantasy VII means the world to me, and of course we're going to circle back to this a little later when this game came back into the public eye. And let me tell you, back in one of the reasons I played this, like I said, maybe in 02 or maybe 03, early 03 was Advent Children was coming out. And Advent Children may be a silly little CG anime movie now, but when you were waiting for it, like I said, I knew of FF7, I had seen some of it, but when I saw the trailers in 02, 03, because the movie took a while to come out, I'm like, I need to play this myself. I loved it when it came out. Like, Advent Children was like a dream when it came out, and it's silly now, but waiting for that is a very fond memory for me. But let's move on a little bit, shall we? Of course, there wasn't just home consoles at this time. You know, you had your Saturns, your PlayStations, your 64s, but what did every kid have at the time? And that was a Game Boy. And what did every kid who had a Game Boy had at that time? That is Pokemon Red or Blue. And yes, I was part of that initial wave. I was 9 years old when Pokemon Red and Blue came out, and my loving mother drove all over the place trying to find it for my birthday that year, and we couldn't find a copy of Red, and Red's my favorite color, so I wanted it, but she's found Blue, and I'm like, I'll take it. And this is my original, very beaten up copy of Pokemon Blue, and God, it's the term zeitgeist really wasn't said around back then around with amongst 9-year-olds. Do you think Pokemon is popular now? And maybe it's more so in some ways, streamers and Pokemon Go. But like, imagine in an early internet era where just everyone played Pokemon. It didn't matter what gender you were. It didn't matter what race you were. It didn't matter. Everyone was playing this, and it was such a great game for expression and connecting with other people via link cables. I still love this game. I think the sprites and music hold up to this day. Could easily be played. It's very charming. It's archaic, yes, but it's simple enough to not be frustrating. And man, did I play the hell out of this. And I will say that led to my favorite Game Boy game of all time. Original Game Boy / Game Boy Color game. And that is its direct sequel, Pokemon Gold and Silver. Particularly, I was a gold kid. And yeah, what can I say? Like I said, one of the greatest sequels of all time. Even though when you look on the calendar, it was only 2 years between blue and red to gold and silver, and with yellow in the middle kind of stemming the wait, it felt like an eternity. There were magazines coming out that you would read in stores about like the 100 new Pokemon coming out, and it's in color. And the revelation when you finally played it, New Barktown is like in my heart even more so than Pallet Town's theme, because I played this game to death. There was just so much more. The night and day cycle, the genders of Pokemon, the fact that you go back to Kanto from Johto blew our minds. This game holds up so incredibly well. And of course, like, my favorite Pokemon game is this, tied with its remake, Heart Gold. And many Pokemon games have come close to this, but like just that Osaka aesthetic and its like simplicity kind of retaining from Gen 1, but the kind of added complexity of some great features makes this game one of my favorites of all time. This game to me was like a year of my life, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're 10 or 11, this was the world. Pokemon was the world to me as a kid. Then I kind of fell out of it for the Game Boy Advance era and DS era, but came back in the very early 3DS era and kind of went back and played the DS games. And to this day, I pick up Pokemon every year. Sometimes I 100% it, sometimes I don't. But these are still like, aesthetically pleasing games, even up to Scarlet and Violet. People say they're glitchy. I didn't encounter that much. Even if I did, I'm still having a good time. They can be deep competitive JRPGs, kind of like the only competitive JRPG out there, or they can just be a fun time where you can like pretend to be a kid and go out and catch Pokemon and have a great time. So yeah, Pokemon, one of my favorite series of all time, and the one that is closest to my heart, Red and Blue. But if I really had to pick, it would be Gold, man. Gen 2, just so close to my heart. And at the turn of the century, I had a Genesis. I had a Saturn. I was a Sonic fan. So what did I have to have? I had to have myself, at the time, the most powerful by a lot console out there, and that was the Sega Dreamcast. And what was the biggest launch game for that? Right here, at least for me, Sonic Adventure. What to say about this? Let me try to encapsulate what the Dreamcast meant to me at the time. The N64, it was hard to kind of distinguish at the time because we didn't know much about it. Like, what was the most powerful console? Of course, we were talking about it. I guess it was the N64 because of bits. It had 64 bits. That's all we knew. That was a real thing. When they said the Dreamcast was going to have 128 bits, people were like, what is that going to look like? That's insane. Like, the PS1 had some incredible visuals, and I guess the N64 looked a little better with double the bits, but it just kind of looked a little different. No, when the Dreamcast came out, and you could ask anyone at this time, and you've probably heard other YouTubers, when this hit like demo kiosks, and you saw that legendary scene of Sonic in the first level, Emerald Coast, running from the whale on the bridge that's being destroyed by the whale, at the time, it brought a tear to my eye. Like, that was it. That was the pinnacle. Games could not look better, and it was so much further ahead than everything else at the time. Like, came out in like late '98 in Japan, and of course 99 here. And only like not even PC games at the time could capture that visual fidelity at that speed. Not really, not to that, like, not commonly anyway. Like, Sonic Adventure looked so far ahead of Mario 64 and even the cutscenes in like PS1 games. And I'm like, I had to have it. I think the greatest Christmas gift I ever received, I was begging for it. I almost knew I was going to get it. It was the Dreamcast. When I opened that up, and I had two launch games my parents got me as a gift were Sonic Adventure and Mortal Kombat Gold, because I loved Mortal Kombat as a kid. That is the only time I remember this. I went in my room, I hooked it up, I started playing Sonic Adventure. It was early, noon when I opened this up. I don't know, 12, 14 hours later, my mom knocks on the door, and that is the only time in my life, because my parents were very liberal with me, it was like, you have to stop playing and go to bed. I played it straight. I could not stop playing Sonic Adventure. And it's a very important game to me. I think the soundtrack to this is burned into the hearts of so many people at that time. And if you had the GameCube re-release a few years later, this game just opened your heart. Like it was mind-blowing. It was great. It brought an RPG element to it as well. And do I think it holds up? Screw anyone who doesn't say it does. This game is still great. Sure, it doesn't look, super sharp, but a lot of people play like enhanced ports on like the 360 or PC, which are buggy ports of the GameCube port, which was a little buggy on itself. There's a video out there describing it. When you go back and you play this original Dreamcast port, it is great. Is it a little buggy? Yeah, kind of, but like not more so than a lot of other games at the time. It controls so smoothly. The voice acting is corny and cheesy, but like that's kind of what I'm looking. I mean, what am I expecting from Sonic in 1999? Even as a kid, I knew it wasn't great, but there was like a whole story. There was like this mystique to it. I love this game so much, even today. So if you're gonna play the original Dreamcast version. It's not expensive to get, and know like, yeah, there's something to it. There's some je ne sais quoi to the original Sonic Adventure that I really do think holds it up there, along with like Mario 64 and Banjo, and just a spectacle, just a true spectacle. Which of course would lead me to 2 years later, one of the Dreamcast's last big hits, a game that I don't. It's hard to say if I've ever wanted a game more and have been. As impressed as I was with Sonic Adventure 2. Now, put this in perspective, like the PS2 is already out and it's killing the Dreamcast. It looks better. But like when Sonic Adventure 2 was announced as kind of a big swan song for the Dreamcast, like we knew it was on its way out. There was something about this game. Yeah, it's corny in a lot of ways, but like it was Sonic Team, like the whole like original Sonic Team's kind of last game in a lot of ways, and you felt that. This game had a sense of finality. It added a lot of characterization to these like Muppet animal characters, and had a great tone. Like it just controlled it so well. Yeah, it was a little janky, just like its predecessor, but like it was just, there was so much to do in this. Of course, you had the 3 different styles of play, which I love them all, like the shooting, the treasure hunting, and the running. But you had multiplayer now, and the Chow Garden was even better. The soundtrack was even more intense. Sonic Adventure 2, like for years, was like, yeah, it's, a lot of people say like, oh, Sonic was never good or they don't hold up. But like, I really do think that the Dreamcast versions of the original adventure games, like you could play them now and still really enjoy them. But, like with many things, at the time, they were kind of untouchable. And they still, in some ways haven't been surpassed by modern 3D Sonic games. I think the level of control that you have in these, it was loose and tight at the same time. It's kind of hard to describe, but it wasn't that boost formula where it was kind of like being forced forward. Like, no, you had a certain amount of control in the air. And the aesthetic was so cool. It was very Japanese. It still kind of held on to that, like kind of that era's kind of nonsensical, whimsical design. But it just was powered by the Dreamcast, and especially too showed off like this was a huge step ahead of the N64 and the PlayStation graphically, which could really do some impressive things. But the Dreamcast, like there was some hidden power there that some developers could tap into, and I think this game displayed it. But of course, at this time, there was one other game, really a series of games on the Dreamcast that kind of changed me. If you were around in the late 90s and you loved, comic books and stuff, of course you played Marvel versus Capcom. And, the first game is legendary, but there is a game on the Dreamcast that I associate with it just as much as Sonic Adventure, and that is Marvel versus Capcom 2. This game, I don't care how unbalanced it is, it's still one of my favorite games of all time. It took a bunch of my favorite characters from Marvel, particularly like a ton of X-Men characters, and put them against, Capcom characters, some of which I knew. I had older cousins who had Street Fighter 2 and Final Fight, which I played the heck out of. But this I liked so much more. And this game was so influential on me because like I'll never forget the experience of it. Like when you turn it on, it has like 20 some odd characters, but you can unlock more by playing through arcade, unlocking like points to buy them. So you buy like a new character. I'm like, okay, and then you buy another. Like, oh, Juggernaut, and then like another, Omega Red. I'm like, okay, and then another, and then another, and then it's like Deep Captain Commando, Tron Bonne, what have you, another Wolverine, and it just kept going. Like, how many characters are in this? This is insane. And it ended up being 56, and just the process. I didn't know who I was going to unlock. I didn't know who was unlockable. Going to that shop and unlocking more and more characters till you get to that insane number of 56, and the game was crazy fun and flashy. In this game, like I said, I'd played a lot of Mortal Kombat growing up, and because I owned a Genesis, I played a lot of Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, and I played my cousin's Street Fighter 2. But like Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2 kind of taught me how to play fighting games correctly. Like doing a Hadouken motion, doing like quarter circles, half circles, weird like Shingoku Satsu's, Raging Demons, kind of became second nature to me when this game came out when I was like 10 years old. Like I was just like, there are a lot of people today who talk about video game accessibility, but I'll tell you, if you find a game that's good enough, it's going to become accessible. You're going to learn it. And Marvel 2 was that game for me. This game later in life would introduce me to so many other franchises. I'm like, hey, what's Hayato from? Like Star Gladiator. What's that? What's Jim from? Cyberbots, Tech Romancer. What, Tronbon, Mega Man Legends. Okay, let me go check that out later on when I got more into the PlayStation side of collecting. And it never really let me down. And it's a game that, yes, would go on to have many sequels and spin-offs, and there's other Capcom fighting games. But when I think like fighting game that I put the most amount of time into in my life, it's got to be Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I really don't think you can replicate this today with licensing and just like the weird, like this design of this game was, hey, let's make some new sprites, characters, but let's just throw everything from the past 6 games in, all the Capcom and Marvel characters and the kitchen sink. And it just worked. It was like, it stuck together. Despite how janky it is, it's still one of my favorite games of all time, and it's still near and dear to my heart. And that brings us to the next era of gaming, my favorite era, looking back, the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. I can make a video talking about why it's my favorite now. Most kids got a PS2, but a lot of people around my age were getting GameCubes, but I saw like demo tapes in stores and stuff of what the original Xbox was going to do. So, and it just really blew my mind. So I got the original Xbox, and my best friend got the PS2, and most kids got the PS2. But I was an Xbox kid at first in that era, and I ended up getting all 3 consoles eventually. And like I said, my favorite era. But for Xbox, I got it. And of course, what do you get when you get an OG Xbox? You get Halo. Now, back in the day, when no one knew what Halo was, I was like 12 years old when this came out. Let me explain. Halo, most first-person shooters in general today have like kind of a bro culture around them, trash talking online and all this negative connotation. But Halo, to me, when it first came out, was just like this incredible sci-fi story. It was one of the best looking games in 2001. Are you kidding me? Like, like I said, at the time, earlier in the year, like you had stuff like, Sonic Adventure looking good and some early PS2 games looking good, but nothing like Halo was just massive. It didn't do the thing with like Turok where like there was fog to kind of hide the limitations. Like, you could go, like the Halo environments were linear, of course, but they were like wide linear. You can kind of explore. And there was like almost like a horror element to Halo as well, which I really loved. Like, you're alone on this ring. What's going on? There was this mystery. It was like hard sci-fi. There wasn't a ton of exposition, but you kind of picked it up along the way. I remember the reveal of the Flood being one of the scariest moments in gaming for me. But just like the tightness of control and like the small, limited, but very like well thought out weapon variety. Halo was just so cool. The music was so good. The ending was so good. Halo, when you go back to it and you just kind of look at it in a vacuum, it's just an excellent game. Forget first person shooter, forget multiplayer online, whatever. It's just like, it's a great game with a great campaign, an amazing multiplayer, local at the time, playing the hell out of this. It's a wacky, it's weird. It has like a quiet sense of humor where the developers put in things that they thought were funny, and like they, like the physics and all this. And when you find them, you get a good laugh. Halo meant the world to me at the time. And it was a reason to have the original Xbox. So of course, when the world rose up to get Halo 2 and celebrate it, I got it. This is the very first midnight launch I ever had, 2004. So I'm like 15 at the time. Very first time my parents let me go line up at a GameStop to pick this game up. And it was worth it, guys. Like, it's weird. Xbox only sold 25 million units. And of course, it was more popular in the US and only really popular in the US. But it felt like the whole planet was up for Halo 2. Like, yeah, PS2 was dominating, of course, like 5-6 to 1. But like the line for Halo 2 around the world, the hype, and make you think that everyone in the world got it. It sold 8 million copies, which is huge, especially back then. But Halo 2, man, the campaign, a lot of people complained, but it was great. But that multiplayer, those early Xbox Live days, I'm sure if I was to go back and watch like footage of it, if I had it, it would be so janky and old and slow. But it was like super smooth in our eyes at the time, playing this for hours and ranking up and getting those old cheap Xbox headsets, playing with your friends, playing locally. There's so many options. Unfortunately, a lot of first-person shooter today don't, even its own sequels, don't have like all those options. A good campaign, split-screen co-op, split screen multiplayer, online multiplayer. Like there was just so much free colors. There's so much to do in Halo 2, and like just the build up for this game was so insane. It felt like it was setting the world on fire, and it really captured the entire world. Even though the Xbox was a small audience in gaming, we felt big at the time. But that wasn't just the only reason to have an Xbox. I loved fighting games, like I said, growing up, Mortal Kombat and all that. But I wasn't so much of a 3D fighting game kid. I didn't have the PS1, so I didn't play a lot of Tekken. But when I saw trailers and magazine ads for this game right here, Soul Calibur 2, and the fact that Spawn was going to be in the Xbox version, and I was a huge comic book kid and loved Spawn Girl, I'm like, I have to check this out. So that was like in 2002, and I got Soul Calibur 1 on the Dreamcast and played that for the year leading up to this, and I loved Soul Calibur 1. I played the hell of it, 100%ed it. So when 2 came out, I was ready. I got this version. I had a friend who had the GameCube, got the Link version, and I had a friend who had the PS2 version, get the Hachi version. I still, to this day, prefer the Spawn version. Like I said, I wasn't a big Zelda fan, but I thought Spawn was really cool. He was kind of overpowered with his attack power. And next to Marvel 2, this is a close second for the amount of hours put into a fighting game. I mean, you have to understand, this game didn't have online when it came out, but there was like 6 or 7 kids in the neighborhood. I was very lucky, like, would just come over your house to take turns playing this. I made myself get good at this game. It was so weird. Like everyone, no matter what system you had, it was different than with Halo, had a version of Soul Calibur 2, and you kind of had to learn all the controls, like how to play on all 3 of them. And that was a very unique bubble for me. I was very lucky and fortunate to have that. When I went to go pick this up, I remember there were people getting all 3 versions. Everyone was picking this up. It's amazing. Soul Calibur felt like in the top of the world. Capcom was kind of on a low. It was like Tekken 4 wasn't super popular at the time, so Soul Calibur kind of stole the throne as the most popular fighting game. The zeitgeist was Soul Calibur. Everyone loved this game. The reviews were incredible, and it was true. This game, just to this day, still plays incredibly well. It's sad that its re-release was delisted, because I can strongly recommend playing this even today. Future Soul Caliburs 3 and 4 were good, not quite as good as this. 5 is terrible. 6 is maybe as good, and I'm glad it went out with a bang, but 2 is like I said, was revered. All the characters were fun. The stages were gorgeous. This game is so close to my heart. The fact that everyone had it, no matter what console, no one was, you'd argue Link, Heihachi, Spawn, whatever, but it didn't matter. Everyone just loved Soul Calibur 2. It's still a game I look back on fondly, because it's like, all right, everyone's going to Tony's house today to play the GameCube version. Then we're all coming over tomorrow. It'd be like 15 kids after, just like waiting their turn to play this. Soul Calibur 2, guys. What can I say? Truly love it. Special to me. But the Xbox had some other exclusives that I love that are oft forgot about, like Ninja Gaiden and its kind of upgrade. Ninja Gaiden Black. This was another Sonic Adventure whale moment for me. At the time in 2004, unquestionably, this was the best looking game, especially on consoles, but probably even PC. 2004, I loved Devil May Cry and all that type of game. So like when I saw this, and I loved Dead or Alive 3. Dead or Alive 3 was incredible looking when it came out. Even to this day, and I saw that this was going to be from the same makers with some of the characters, the main character Ryu Hayabusa being from them. Like, I have to get it. And I thought the trailers were kind of lying. Like, oh, those are cutscenes. It can't look that good. This game, everyone audibly when they first saw this game would go, whoa. I'd have my PS2 and GameCube homies come over and like play the first level of this, and it was like, wow. Like they would just want to play this, because not only was it visually incredible, it played unbelievably deeply. It had the depth of like a fighting game, much like Devil May Cry in that way, but just like the visuals. And yeah, everyone says it's one of the hardest games of all time, but like it didn't really register with me at the time, because I just wanted to keep playing. I'm like, yeah, it's tough, but like I need to keep going. I think I've beaten this game like 10 times. I beat it in Black, and all that. Like Ninja Gaiden was just something else. It showed that you could have great visuals and great gameplay and sacrifice like nothing. Something you don't see today. The speed of this game still holds up. Play any version of it. This original version, which also includes as an unlockable the original NES Ninja Gaiden, is still only available on the OG Xbox, but you can still play Black and its re-releases like Sigma on modern consoles. But moving on, there's another amazing exclusive that is tied to kind of these that I talk about a lot, and that is From Software's Otogi games. 2 of my favorite games of all time that have luckily been brought on the backwards compatible list on Xbox. These were prior to Dark Souls. Like I didn't know who From Software was at the time, but what it was is I got the demo disc for Soul Calibur 2 to play it, and on that demo disc it had Otogi 1. And it was very similar to DMC or Ninja Gaiden, but kind of mixed with like a Dynasty Warrior sense of like you're an immensely powerful character, Raiko, who can make 40-foot vertical double jumps. And I always love my double jumps. This is one of the reasons why I started with Vector Man, continued here. And the environments were entirely destructible. And essentially, you were just told to kill demons. So you'd have these massive air battles and smack a demon into a building that would explode, and you leveled up and you could jump higher and you did more attack power. There's 33 weapons in the first one. It's one of my favorite games ever. And then its sequel came out. It wasn't a huge hit, so I was shocked. It had 6 less weapons, but had 6 playable characters, and it looked incredible. And there was slowdown, but it was like, that's just bullet time, because you were fighting hundreds of enemies or sometimes one enormous enemy. If you have an original Xbox or an Xbox Series console, please check out the Otogi 1 and 2 games. I talk about them all the time. I really wish From Software would re-release these, but this was my first introduction to that company. But along with like Ninja Gaiden, Devil May Cry, 2 of my favorite games of all time, Otogi. But we're circling back now to a game. Like I said, I was a Saturn kid, and I had some exposure to the original before it came out. I'd more have heard of it than anything. But I saw trailers on the original PS2 for the game we're about to talk about, and I had to have it once I got an Xbox and I saw there was a port. And that was Metal Gear Solid 2. Yes, believe it or not, this was the first Metal Gear game I ever played. The trailers were just too incredible looking for me to not check this out. And even though I had barely known any knowledge of the original PlayStation one at the time, it kind of added a mystique to it. They always talked about like Shadow Moses, like, oh, some shit went down there. And I must have went through this game 18 times. I wasn't put off by being Raiden because it was my first time playing the game. And immediately upon beating this, I went to my friend's house with Metal Gear, and I just never asked them like, hey, let's play this. I'm like, can I borrow your entire PlayStation and play through Metal Gear Solid 1? And I went through that 10 times, and like unlocking everything and like different colors. So I basically went back between Metal Gear 1 and 2, and it became like one of my favorite games. Like Metal Gear was everything I didn't know I wanted in games. Besides gaming, I was a huge anime fan growing up and a huge action movie fan growing up. Sci-fi movies like Aliens and Predator and regular action like Die Hard. My parents did not limit what I watched at all. Maybe it messed me up, but I love those. My favorite type of movies. And I don't know who said it succinctly first, a friend of mine, who basically said what Metal Gear Solid is, it's Die Hard with anime characters. And that was perfect. And that's when I realized why these games were so special to me. Metal Gear Solid in general was just an action movie, trappings. You know, the director Kojima loved his action movie trappings, but filled with anime and Eastern tropes, like the over characterization that are so endearing, without like the boring characters and villains. Like it had a spice of that anime injection, especially that like the 90s anime, 80s anime kind of character. And it had a historical context. It was a world close to ours, not quite parallel, but had the same history. And there was long monologues and cutscenes, exposition out the wazoo, Kodak conversations. There was like real politics mixed in with like characters with superpowers, and there's weird idiosyncrasies and non sequiturs. But it seems silly, but it was told in such a sincere way that it touched your heart. It all worked. All these influences from film and anime and real historical context, somehow Kojima was able to put it together in these 2 games in such a believable way that you couldn't help but love it and marvel at it. Visually, spectacularly, it was a movie. Like today, there's too many games that are too much like movies. This was the intent of Metal Gear, and it still played great. And these characters endeared with you, got attached to you. These stories meant something to you. And that's one of the reasons when I got a PS2, I needed to have this game. It's one of the games I waited for the most, Metal Gear Solid 3. Now, Knights might be the game that's nearest and dearest to my heart, but if I had to say the game that I love the most, like my number 1 game, it might have to be Metal Gear Solid 3, guys. And I'll say this, it's hard for me to say what my favorite games are in a franchise. I will say this now, Metal Gear Solid is my favorite gaming series of all time. More than Sonic, more than Street Fighter, more than Final Fantasy, even though those are all up there. Metal Gear hits like a certain note for me, and particularly this third entry. It's one of the few games who actually made me cry. I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's true. You guys all know, hitting that X button, pulling that trigger. I think this set a bar for storytelling and gaming that really hasn't been matched in a lot of ways. A lot of people will say like Last of Us or what have you. I don't think so. Like Metal Gear was still proud of being a game, even though it was a movie in itself in a lot of ways. It still had gaminess to it. It still had silly things like a man who can control bees, a guy with electric powers, and all this. Like the whole thing with the end sniper, like changing the game clock. It still was very gamey, but it told a story that was huge and monumental about the Cold War that many people like my age couldn't like connect to because we didn't live through it, but we like it made it interesting. It made me like history. It gave a context as a prequel to the first two games, and seeing those connections were incredible. Yeah, is it over the top? But yes, and like I said, idiosyncrasies and exposition out the wazoo. But like I said, a sincerity that is rarely seen. It wasn't ashamed of how wacky it was. It was going to tell you a serious story with anime characters in an action movie settings, and it touched my heart. And I think I've gone through this game 25 times. I play it every time it's re-released. I can't wait to see what the re-release is going to be like. I don't think a game like this could be made today in the same style. Some of the characters in this are some of my favorite characters of all time. If I had to say my number one favorite game of all time, maybe we'll make another video on it. It's got to be Metal Gear Solid 3. And what you're seeing here is Subsistence, the enhanced version. Like I said, I got a PS2. Moving on, we got to keep going, guys. PS2, especially the late era PS2 games. My God, incredible! This is why this is my favorite era of gaming. PS2 kind of had a monopoly on some of exclusive Japanese games. Particularly a game that I talk about how much I love all the time, Okami. Now, I'm going to say something kind of controversial here, and this is going to be kind of a tease for a future video where I talk about my hot takes. I think Okami is better than any 3D Zelda game because it was made by people who made some prior Zelda games and also Platinum games. Like I love this game. I think about this game all the time. I don't think it's something that really needs a sequel or whatever. I mean, it had a DS kind of sequel, but it wasn't to the full scale of this game. I love this game's aesthetics and visuals and controls and combat and the amount of stuff you can unlock. It's a very special game. I love Japanese mythology, of course. Come on, I love anime and all these games. I love the open world of it. I love the combat. I love the references to other Capcom games. This game is a magnum opus. I think this is one of the greatest games of all time. It kind of combines all the elements of games that I like. And it can be very silly, but like I said, it's told with a sincerity that is rare in games today. Okami. This game is available on every platform. If you've never played it, please do. It's a very special game, near and dear to my heart. And I don't care what anyone says about how nonsensical it is. It makes sense if you play it. And this next game tells a story that comes straight from the heart. And that is, in fact, Kingdom Hearts. Yes, the first two Kingdom Hearts games on PlayStation, very special to a lot of people. The whole series is. Kingdom Hearts 2 in particular is my favorite. I'm holding the first game here because this is what started it, but Kingdom Hearts 2 is really the one. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I'll say that Kingdom Hearts 2, I don't know where to rank it, one of my favorite games of all time. It came out in an era where Disney wasn't as controlling as they are now. I think that Kingdom Hearts 3 is great, but I think you see the limitations that Disney may have put on Square. And Square can be a pretty greedy company themselves these days. And I think it lacked some of the heart, as it were, of Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 and its spin-offs like Birth by Sleep and what have you, which I also love. Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 are sad stories. That's really what they are. Like there's a sweet somberness, sorrow even, to all of them. And of course, part of the charm was seeing Cloud and Sephiroth interact with like Disney characters from movies that I loved, like Lion King and Hercules and Jungle Book. And these games were very early action RPGs that had, the air combat was a lot of fun, especially in Kingdom Hearts 2. They introduced a whole cast of characters like Organization 13. And people say that it's hard to follow, but if you stuck with it, you just had to play it from the first one. I do admire the boldness of the Kingdom Hearts series for not making it easy for newcomers and to just kind of enrich it for people who have stuck with it. And like I said, maybe the story doesn't always follow logical sense, but like I said, I think this is a game more about the feel than the story. And I know that's a very corny and kind of cop-out thing to say, but like that's what these games are about. It's about a dream. It's very especially the early ones are very dreamlike in their settings and their aesthetic. That early Square Enix PS2 era magic is just in the early Kingdom Hearts games. One of my favorite series of all time. I'll always support Kingdom Hearts. Birth by Sleep and Part 2 are my favorites. I think 3 just did okay enough for me to accept it. I think there's great things in it, but like the PS2 Kingdom Hearts games, guys, if you haven't experienced them, go in with an open mind. Yeah, it's going to be cheesy and anime-y, but like just kind of wonder at it. Kind of get into the kayfabe for my wrestling fans out there of what's going on. Like it was a magical thing to have like these Disney movies that you may have grown up with, along with characters from games that you love, along with these new original characters, told in yet again an incredibly sincere, kind of sad way, with an incredible soundtrack and great combat. Kingdom Hearts, what can I say? And of course, speaking of combat, I got to talk about the Devil May Cry series. Guys, Dante, one of the coolest characters of all time. In Devil May Cry franchise, one of the most fun games of all time. God of War, eat your heart out because Dante did it first and did it better. Just the amount of enemy variety, weapon variety, especially when it comes. Devil May Cry 2 kind of sucked. It really sucked. But when it came back with Devil May Cry 3 in particular, the special edition, like I said, the amount of control that you had, the style, even the story, simple as it was very endearing. I think Devil May Cry 3 in particular is one of my favorite action games of all time. 4 and 5 are great. Even the reboot's not that bad. There's something about 3 with the selection of weapons and the like 4 characters in the whole story. It's like Dante, Virgil, Lady, and Arkham. That's really it. Like with those characters told a pretty long-lasting, simple story with gameplay that was just what, and it was challenging and it pushed you to learn its mechanics that were as deep as a fighting game. Devil May Cry 3, one of my favorite games of all time. Man, this video is going for a while, guys, but there's no stopping this train. And lastly, on the PS2 note, games that are very near and dear to my heart. A lot of people were getting into Persona 3 and 4 in the very last days of the PS2, but not I. I loved the Dot Hack Sign anime growing up, and when I didn't have a PS2, my buddy got the original 4 Dot Hack games, which I would later play myself and love. But when I had a PS2, these were coming out, the Dot Hack GU games, and I love these games oh so much. These games, if you don't know, are RPGs set in an MMO that the world is, about to be destroyed, people falling into comas. And the save file from part 1 would carry over into part 2 and 3, and they were released like 6 months apart. These were so much better playing than the original quadrilogy, if you will. And, it told a really fun story with some great voice actors. It was limited at the time. It was 07. The PS3 was already out. It was still a PS2 game. There's something about these, though. The music was incredible. It was fun. These games mean a lot to me, guys. Were they as polished or big budget as something like Persona? No, but these were kind of like what I was playing at the time. And these did mean something to some people because like these games were re-released on modern consoles not long ago. There was anime tie-ins, and if you watched it, and I did, all the tie-ins and everything that led up to these games were fantastic. Yuri Lowenthal, who'd go on to be a huge voice actor. One of his earlier roles was starring as Haseo on these. I love these games so much. I look back in these fondly. But that's enough for Dot Hack. We got to jump into the next generation. The 7th gen, a lot of issues, right? Going back to that era, that's where a lot of the DLC practices and gaming kind of became more mainstream and for normies. But there was still like a huge collection of fantastic games. And of course, sequels to some of my favorite original Xbox games, like Ninja Gaiden 2. I still think on a sheer combat level, this may be the best of the third-person action genre. Like Ninja Gaiden 1 is a better game as a whole, as a put-together piece. But just the combat in Ninja Gaiden 2 is fast, it's difficult, it's unforgiving. But the weapon variety, the way you deal with enemies, chopping off limbs to disarm them, literally. It really hasn't been surpassed by even its sequels. This game pushed you to the edge. It's like the hardest game I've ever played on the highest difficulty. It made every other game I played after that kind of seem easy, but this made me a better gamer. And sure, it was a little buggy at the time. Not that I noticed too much, but if you play this now on modern Xbox consoles, if you pop this in, it runs super smooth. It's one of the best action games you could ever play. This is an 80s action anime. Those overly violent, mid 80s, late 80s, anime movies where just blood flies everywhere, Ninja Blade comes to mind, all that type of anime. That's this game. What this game's whole vibe is, it doesn't make a ton of sense. You jump all over the world killing fiends, demons, monsters, ninja, blood and head just flying everywhere, all while being during using a character that is fine-tuned with some of the greatest controls to this day I've ever played in the game. Ninja Gaiden 2, check it out. You guys know I love me some Ninja Gaiden. But what was big during the 7th gen for me, other than that? Well, that was fighting games, guys. Street Fighter 4, everyone knows. I wasn't an 09er. I didn't come into fighting games with Street Fighter. 4, but and what I'm holding here is Super Street Fighter 4. But in '09, when it did come out, it was kind of a revival of that scene. Everyone, much like how Soul Calibur was earlier in my life, was playing Street Fighter 4, and it was incredible. Street Fighter 4 also has a personal note for me. I grew up very overweight. What to say, with all these video games, how could I not? I was inside playing great games. But there was a year where I finally said, no, I need to lose some weight and get in shape. And Street Fighter 4 was out at that time. And every time I was like, I wanted to eat out of boredom, or I got cravings when I knew I wasn't hungry or had, wanted sweets, I would hop online in Street Fighter 4 because you can't pause or leave the game. It would help me forget. So essentially, like my hunger. So essentially, Street Fighter 4 helped me get in shape, lose some weight. So like I always thank it for being so good. I would actually forget, and within a year, I lost like 100 pounds. So like, I must say, I got to thank Street Fighter for being so good and helping me out with that. And of course, throughout that generation, this game was getting updates, like with Super Street Fighter 4 seen here a year later, and the arcade edition, and then Ultra Street Fighter 4. The whole generation was kind of a revival of fighting games in a lot of ways. That would crash and burn, but is now kind of back up. But Street Fighter 4 was kind of the game to play. And with that, we got a miracle game, something I never thought would come out at the time. One of the most hyped times in my life was when Marvel vs. Capcom 3 came out. And yes, guys, I must say, like, I never thought a Marvel 3 would come out. Even though Marvel and Capcom were big, Marvel 2 was kind of a niche title, but it did. Disney had just acquired Marvel at the time, and we didn't think it could ever happen, and it came out and it was awesome. I never wanted a fighting game more than I wanted Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Like, how's it going to be? It can't compare to 2. And finally, when it came to the Ultimate version, which was an update that came out later in the year, it came pretty damn close. Marvel 2 is still my favorite. But Marvel 3 was excellent. I put hundreds of hours into that, and just like the build up to it. I remember going to every Capcom panel. I went to San Diego Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con, any kind of convention I could, and get to the Capcom panel where they would talk about these games. I remember I was in the room where they announced MODOK and Arthur. Not the greatest characters to hear announced, but still very cool to be a part of. Capcom was on fire at the time because of these two games. And a very precious part of my life looking back, because it made me go to conventions and meet people and, kind of get into the whole like zeitgeist of the era. And Marvel 3 and Street Fighter 4 were it, man, let me tell you. But how can we go into the 360 era? How can we exit without talking about Halo 3. I just want to keep this briefly. I think this is like one of the greatest games of all time to this day. It's been said before. This game is so feature rich with its single player, its co-op, its online multiplayer, its local multiplayer, its map builder, uploading maps and replays and all that. Halo 3 in a lot of ways has never been surpassed, and I don't think it can be surpassed because every feature in this game would be a hardware issue or monetized. In modern day, whether it be the skins that you can unlock, like you'd have to pay for them now, playing this, or with like loadouts or weapon customization. I think the Halo Master Chief Collection has curated this game fantastically and expanded upon it. But at the time, before Call of Duty took over the world, Modern Warfare 4 came out around the same time as this game. But it was big, but Halo 3 actually matched it. Can you imagine young kids that Halo and Call of Duty used to be at the time like rivals, and Halo 3 was edging it out? Like Modern Warfare, great for some people. It's not Halo 3. It's not in general. Call of Duty couldn't. If Halo had continued to this day, and this is conjecture, of course, with Bungie and continued the trajectory they were going, Call of Duty couldn't touch Halo. Sure, if you want a more realistic game, you can go with that. But Halo 3 just had so much creativity and fun. And it was a game the whole world was playing. This was the big reason why in the early goings of the 7th gen, the 360 was selling better than the PS3. You had to play Halo. Halo 3 in particular. Hundreds of hours put into this one, guys. What can I say? But that's not to say it was the only game console of the generation, the 360. Of course, a little later on, I laughed at it at first, you got the Wii. And you got some of the best games of all time on there. You got the Mario Galaxy games, yes. I, of course, grew up as a Sega kid, but I love me some Mario. Like I said, I've always preferred 2D Sonic to 2D Mario, but when it comes to 3D, I must say, as a track record, I might prefer Mario. It's hard to say, but Mario Galaxy to this day remains my favorite. 64 is great, Sunshine is weird but fun, and Odyssey was fantastic, and 3D World and all that, but there's something about the vibe and control of the Mario Galaxy games, and I can never decide which one I like more. The vibe and control of these on the Wii. Yet again, kind of somber feeling, like you're out in space, it's dark, the music's orchestral, it'll break your heart. It's mind blowing. Like, I needed to get all the stars in both these games. I couldn't put it down. And despite the Wii and Nunchuck, Wiimote and Nunchuck not being ideal controllers for most games, they were like perfectly made to. These games are perfectly made to use them. Like, I don't like playing the new Switch remaster as much on the for Mario Galaxy 1 because I don't think it controls as good. I really do think if you want the best experience, you really need to play Galaxy 1 on the Wii. These games are magical to me. I think they're perfect. I think that Odyssey is good, but they tone down the difficulty too much. You kind of breeze through it. Like, some of the challenges in these games were hard, guys. So like, they're kind of burned into your brain, but they were fun for the most part. There's like one or two things like the Manta Ray mini games and all that aren't fantastic, but like the creativity on going to different planets, Cloud Mario, like one of the greatest suits of all time. These games mean so much to me. They're a reason to own the Wii. They're a reason to go back and play the Wii. Galaxy 2 getting shafted in that collection still breaks my heart. Mario 1 probably had the better vibe, and Mario 2 had the better power-ups, so it's hard to say. You really got to have both. Let me say, I don't think Mario has yet to surpass these games in any way, and hopefully they will one day, but till now, these are two of my favorite 3D platforms and games of all time. And one last note on the Wii, a small game I just want to shout out, and that is Fragile Dreams, Farewell Ruins of the Moon. Very small game that I mentioned in my Wii collecting video. If you want to talk about heart, much in the same way Knights has heart, some of the most beautiful vistas and characterizations ever in a game, and a very simple, janky, not great playing game, but there's some magic to it, some je ne sais quoi. Fragile Dreams, one of my favorite games of all time, just for the aesthetic and music. Check it out. I'll go into this one in another video. I'm getting closer to the modern day, guys. Yet again, PS3 is out this time. I didn't get it at first. I got my 360, then I got the Wii. But there was a game that I needed to have. The whole world was waiting on bated breath. And I think you guys know what I'm talking about because many people got a PS3 for this. Metal Gear Solid 2 left off on a cliffhanger. Metal Gear Solid 3 was a prequel, and both were a lead up for this game right here. Metal Gear Solid 4 comes of the Patriots. Now, it's hard to say with Marvel 3 and Pokemon Gold and the game we'll talk about later on, but I have to say, if I had to say, what's the game that you wanted the most, that the hype was so unreal, I look back on it fondly, like you had to get this. What game did you enjoy waiting for the most? What game did you want the most in your hands? And that would be this game here. I have such fond memories of this game. Like, this game made me and my best friend get a PS3. We saw the trailers of like Vamp fighting Raiden and Old Snake and all these connections to Metal Gear 1, 2, and 3, and we're like, this is it. This is the end of the story that we had been following for a decade. The game's visuals were untouchable at the time, 2008 in June when this came out. Like, nothing looked this good. The characters that we had, known for the last 10 years were coming back, and they looked better than ever. The gameplay was vastly improved, and I'll never forget it. I asked my boss at the time, can I have the Friday off so I could pick this game up, and he said yes. I worked at a GameStop, so he knew, and I was buying it from him, like, hey, I'm going to buy this game. Like, can I have this day off to play? This game means a lot to me, and he gave it to me. My friend bought the PS3 Metal Gear Solid 4 bundle for this release, and I wanted to play it with him. This is my best friend, and we'd grown up playing Metal Gear, and we wanted to experience this together. So we go to his house, we hook up his PS3 for the first time. Neither of us had it. We both got a PS3 for this. And we started the game up, and you have to watch Snake smoking for the install. And it was early in the day, like 10 in the morning. We started playing, and I don't think we talked to each other throughout the whole thing. We just were in awe. I watched him play because I'd play it later. I didn't get my PS3 just yet. I got the game, but I didn't get the PS3 yet. I had to wait a little while. And it was like magical to go through. That game is just fan service in the best of ways. Not only did it play incredibly and look incredibly, it was the story that we wanted. People can say this or that about Metal Gear 4, but I loved it. And we stayed in there for like 14 hours. I know the game isn't that long, but like, we combed over it. We looked at everything. We read every file. We checked every unlockable. We did everything. We ordered a pizza halfway through. Like, when you find out Siggett is the DARPA chief, we both audibly gasped and looked at each other. It's probably my favorite gaming memory, period, is me locked in my room with my friend playing through Metal Gear Solid 4. We played till late in the night. I went to bed, went home, I lived close, went to bed, woke up, called him like, you want to finish this? And he's like, let's finish this. And we did. In 2 days, we finished Metal Gear Solid 4, and we loved every minute of it. It was a great denouement. Of course, there would be later Metal Gear games, but 4 kind of felt final. In a lot of ways, it was for this main story. Still, my favorite gaming memory is the build-up hype and then playing through this game in 2 sittings, locked in a room with our brand new PS3, playing Metal Gear Solid 4. I thank this game. I thank Kojima. This game, one of my favorites. And this is part of the reason why Metal Gear Solid is my favorite franchise of all time. But we must move on. The next generation started with the Wii U. And even though I like the Wii, I wasn't a die-hard Wii family. I could probably wait on the Wii U until this game was announced. Bayonetta 2. Now, I didn't mention it earlier, but on the 360, I loved Bayonetta to death. It's one of my favorite games. Is Devil May Cry kind of, 4 was good, but Bayonetta 1 was better than Devil May Cry 4, and they kind of going with that reboot era. When I saw that they were making a Bayonetta 2 and it was exclusive to the Wii U, I signed up, I pre-ordered it in the New York Nintendo store that day. I was there at the midnight launch for my Wii U, and I had not a ton to play for those first 2 years, but when this game finally came out, it was worth the wait. This is like my favorite action game of all time. Ninja Gaiden 2 may have the best gameplay. Devil May Cry 3 may have the best style. But Bayonetta kind of combined both those things into an aesthetically pleasing, gorgeous game. It was kind of a miracle in my eyes because I was at this time already a game collector and understood companies like kind of how games are made and all this. To know that this was a Platinum game, who's made by Platinum Games, who is essentially the core of Capcom, who had made some of my favorites like Okami and God Hand, produced by Sega, who of course I love Sonic and the Dreamcast, of course, what are we talking about, and co-produced by Nintendo, who I also love talking about Mario and all this. So it's basically Capcom, Sega, and Nintendo coming together to make a game, an M-rated game that referenced all of them. There were Nintendo costumes. You got Sonic's rings. There's tons of Capcom Clover Studio references, like turning into a panther, leaving flowers behind, like Amaterasu would leave flowers behind. It was just like this hodgepodge of my favorite game makers coming together to make a polished, fun, challenging game with tons of unlockables and replayability and over-the-topness. Like, this game just loved being a video game. It loved it in a genre that I loved. I love Devil May Cry Ninja Gaiden. So of course, the game being that third-person action game really helped. And like, I love this game. I 100%ed it. I 100%ed it again when it came out on the Switch. It was the reason I bought a Wii U, and I don't regret it, even though it came out on the Switch. There are tons of great games on the Wii U, but this game was special. This is the reason I bought it, and it lived up to the hype. I had to wait 2 years. Wii U came out in 2012. This came out in late 2014, and it's one of the reasons Bayonetta came to Smash. I loved it. It was my favorite game developers, Nintendo, Sega, and Platinum, coming together to make something that I don't even think the third game surpassed. I think Bayonetta 2 is still the best. Bayonetta 1 is incredible, but just some of the stuff in Bayonetta 2 that they added, the customization, the style, Bayonetta's costume, I couldn't get enough of this. The weapon variety was a little better in this one in my eyes. The enemy variety as well, the angels and demons. I cannot describe how much fun I had with this game. This is probably my favorite action game of all time. Is it play the best? Maybe it's behind Ninja Gaiden, or Devil May Cry 5, but there's something about Bayonetta 2, some untouchable thing that I'm like, yeah, this was a magnum opus for Platinum. I can't say enough good things about it. We're getting near the end, guys. I would then get a PS4, but before that, right around this time, I just want to take a quick little aside. Yet again, handhelds are big at this time. DS and PSP were huge. Now, I had both, but I was more of a fan of my PSP because more games and franchises I cared about was coming out. And the big three were Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, which was a real kind of continuation. It was a prequel to the Kingdom Hearts series, but it was kind of like the next big step for Kingdom Hearts. 358 Days Over 2 and Chain of Memories were fine, were great, but they were kind of smaller because one was on the DS, one was on the GBA and the PS2. This game was kind of, even though it was on the PSP, it still felt big, and it was a long game, and it lived up. I love this game. It's up there with 2 being my favorite, especially the final mix that ironed out some of the rough parts. I thought the story was good. I thought the lead up to Kingdom Hearts 1 was fantastic. Birth by Sleep has one of my favorite ending cutscenes of all time. And yeah, I love this game. Played the hell out of it in the dark with headphones on my PSP. Fine memories. But the game I played the most was probably this game and its sequel, Dissidia. Are you kidding me? All the Final Fantasy main characters and villains coming together in a 3D arena brawler with heavy RPG elements where you level up to 100 and you assign moves. So no two, like let's say clouds are the same, like your cloud would be different than my cloud. And it had a full story mode that was fully voiced and like unlockable weapons. Are you kidding me? This is a little miracle. Sure, it was all told with like 22 characters and like 10 stages, but it was like a Final Fantasy museum in of itself. The amount of music and summons and artwork you could get, and even more expanded in sequel Duodecim. The third game in this series that came to consoles cannot touch this. That game is trash compared to these. It's not even that good on its own right. Dissidia was like a dream match. It was kind of what we wanted out of Kingdom Hearts in a lot of ways, with all the characters meeting up. Like Cloud could fight Squall and the Warrior of Light and Garland, and you could have Titus versus Zidane and Squall versus Terra. It was just so cool, and it felt high budget. It wasn't an HD console, but there was a lot in these games. I put like 1,000 hours in. Whenever I'm out, Dissidia 1 and 2, play the hell out of it. But my favorite PSP game, one of my favorite games of all time, recently re-released, was right here, Final Fantasy Crisis Core. And I'll say this quickly, I think the remake is marred by Zack's bad voice actor. I'm usually not one to critique such things, but I will say that the main voice actor for Zack in this, Rick Gomez, put a lot of heart into it, and I think the new voice actor actually hurts the experience in the remake. This game was a PSP exclusive for years. This right here was the reason I wanted a PSP. I loved Final Fantasy VII, I loved Advent Children, and Crisis Core coming out looking the way it did, even though it was a PSP game, looked great. I needed it. Like, oh, you're going to find out the prequel, what happened before FF7. And unlike Advent Children and some of the other spin-offs like Dirge of Cerberus, one thing Crisis Core got right was the vibe of the Final Fantasy VII world. It felt right. Yes, it had more PS2-like visuals, was a big enhancement. It felt right. Very overwrought characters like Genesis, very anime feeling, but like something about it on the handheld, and like I said, told entirely sincerely. A lot of people have trouble with like early 2000s anime characters, like translations, but it's a cultural difference between the West and the East, and it's the way those stories are told. But if you get into that kayfabe, yet again, if you get into the mood of it, and just take it for what it is, and you realize that this game isn't winking at you, it's totally sincere. It tells one of my favorite stories of all time, wrapped in a container of fantastic gameplay, especially for a handheld. Yes, there's elements of randomness, but that kept it exciting, and it was deep. It was deeper than you could think, and Zack is one of my favorite, he is my favorite Final Fantasy character of all time, especially after this. I replayed this 3 times, 100%ed it, and going through the remake, but there's something about this original PSP version that was just special. This was a reason to own the PSP. It looked great, played great, sounded great. It made the DS offerings, which DS had way more games, it made them pale in comparison, and for years there was a reason to have this console. It's still very near and dear to my heart. Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. Square killed it on that console. But let's jump to the last console that I'm going to be talking about. This video went very, very long, guys, and I thank you for sticking with me. But we're going to go to the PS4, Xbox One era. And I won't go any further than that because the current era, the PS5 and Series X, isn't over yet. And I kind of want to wait till that. But PS4 is the one I went with this gen. Xbox One, I have some great games on there like Killer Instinct and Master Chief Collection, but I was mostly a PS4 player this gen. And what were some of the games that stuck out to me? Well, not an exclusive, but a game I never thought I would see, Sonic Mania. I remember being so enthralled. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A 2D Sonic that was sprite-based. What is this? And you could be Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails, and then later on they expanded with more characters, Mighty and Ray. I'm like, Sonic, goes through highs and lows, and that's not like, it's like a trope to say. But in 2017, after Sonic Boom, that era, which I did not care for, to see them go back to their roots and not in the Sonic the Hedgehog Part 4 way with 2.5D, like no, sprites. Like it was announced like a year before it came out, and just seeing like the little tidbits of gameplay, like no, it looks right. Like Sonic is all about its physics and its aesthetic, and when I finally got it, it nailed it. It felt right. It looked incredible. It was fun. It was for Sonic fans or new fans. I replay this game all the time when I'm feeling blue or bored or just need a quick adrenaline or endorphin rush. I'll play these. They expanded it with Plus, which was a cheap, like $5 expansion that added 2 characters and a bunch of alternate stages. It was great. I couldn't believe they nailed the feel. if all Sonic games really need to be to really pass the bar for me is to feel good when you run and jump, and it nailed it for me. But to add the incredible soundtrack and remix stages and the absolutely untouchable sprite work, it's one of my favorite games of all time. It might be my favorite Sonic game even still. We may never get another in this exact style, but that's okay, because this game was a miracle in of itself, that people who grew up with Sonic got to make a Sonic game and made it as good as, if not better than the originals. You can feel that if you play this. It's one of my favorite games of the era, Sonic Mania. I can't see us ever getting something like this again. Truly special. But my favorite new IP on the era, of the era, started on the Vita, but kind of blew up on the PS4. My favorite new Sony IP, and that has sadly lost to time, are these games right here, the Gravity Rush games. Just Gravity Rush 1 and 2, very special, very rare. Actually made by the guys who made the first Silent Hill. Gravity Rush is not, all games are designed to make money, right? But like, these games were made as kind of art and experience first. These games were creative. There's nothing else really quite like them. Floating around as the main character, Cat, in a world that is like based on France and uses a made-up language and has its own lore. Just the sense of momentum and freedom and beauty in this game. The music, the aesthetic, the models, everything in these games was very original, unique, beautiful, and came from the heart. All games, like I said, are designed to make money, but not like this. This is a game that came from an idea first, and I feel like that's rare in a world full of sequels and spin-offs and remakes, which I love as well. Just to have a little bit of something original that really hits that mark. It's not from an indie creator and not limited by those budgets. I love indies, but you know what I'm saying. Like, just to have Sony behind a new IP that wasn't designed with microtransactions and all this nonsense. And sure, it wasn't the biggest seller, and it was pulled, like any of the limited online support did have, was already pulled pretty quickly for Gravity Rush 2. But to get a remake of the first one, which was originally on the Vita, on the PS4, and it be great, and then have the massive sequel be a PS4 exclusive, and just really come from the heart and soul of people who want to just make good creative games, these are rare. And it was my favorite new IP on the PlayStation 4 during the era. And what can I say? But there's two games of a series that I love, of Final Fantasy, I want to briefly touch upon right now. And the first one I'm going to talk about is Final Fantasy 15, as it were. Now, this game is controversial. Was it good? Was it bad? Is it janky? Is it easy to go back to? We're not going to talk about that here. I enjoyed this game. I played it at launch and platinum this game. So the game I played would be different than the game you play now, because this game has been revamped with DLC and updates and the Royal Edition and all that. I played it at launch 100%, and I still enjoyed it. Had heart, had problems, but it had heart. In the end, brought a tear to my eye. You guys are the best. If you know, you know. However, what I really enjoy about this game, and sadly miss, was the build-up to it. This game was originally announced as Final Fantasy 13 in 2006, before Final Fantasy 13 even came out. It took a decade until it finally came out as 15 when it was rebranded in late 2016. And every time you see trailers for this game, it looked better than the mainline games and the other Square games coming out at the time. Like, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? And like, the wait for it was so insane, and everyone kind of gave up on it. But when it finally dropped, when it was finally getting closer, like, oh man, it's in our hands, I actually missed the hype, because at the time it could have been the greatest game of all time, it could have been the worst game, but just like that nebulous period where anything could happen, where you're dreaming of the game, the next numbered Final Fantasy, like, it's a special time. And 10 years, like I said, and all those changes, and it finally came out, a miracle that it didn't get canceled. Games like that almost always get canceled, but to be rebranded as a number title and finally come out, I think is one of my favorite things. That, like, from the time I was 16 to the time I was 26, just waiting for this game, that's something I'll probably never have again, because I wanted this game every day of those 10 years. And when it came out, it lived up in a lot of ways. Maybe I gave it some passes on some bad things, but I really did enjoy this game. I loved many things about it, and just for it to be real in my hands was very special after 10 years of waiting. Which leads me to the second to last game I'm going to talk about now, and I've talked about this series a lot, but let's talk about the FF7 remake. Announced before 15 came out, one of my favorite games of all time. FF7 had a huge revival in the late 2000s with Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus, and Advent Children, but then it kind of went quiet again. And there were interviews saying that FF7 could not be remade. They showed a quick teaser for the PS3 of the opening scene. People thought it was an announcement of a remake. It wasn't. They're like, oh, it's too big. It wouldn't translate well today. It'd have to be worked on. It was a very special team at that time. But when this was finally announced at E3, I believe 2015, I couldn't believe it. And I was worried, but I was happy at the same time. One of my favorite games of all time is going to be on new gen consoles for new people to play and for fans of the old one. And for 5 years, radio silent on most of those 5 years, we waited. And waiting for it was great because you could wonder, what's it going to be? We were upset it was going to be split into multiple parts. Sure. Was it going to be turn-based? We were upset when it wasn't turn-based, but it still looked pretty cool. But you'd see trailers and you're like, yo, it looks pretty good. And I'll never forget, this game came out in the early parts of COVID in April 2020. And I had plenty of time to play it. I remember getting to that title screen, turning the game on, and seeing the sword in the darkness that says "New Game, Continue," and I burst into tears. I'm like, oh, it's real. Not only is one of my favorite games of all time out, but a game that I had waited 5 years for was out, and they started it with something that would be recognizable to every fan. And then they do the scene where it pulls back from Aerith to Midgard and you see FF7. I started laughing and crying by myself. I must have looked crazy to anyone who might be watching because I'm like, it's not only real, it's nailing the vibe. And say what you will about the remake gameplay, how they're changing things, what's staying the same. Is it needed? Blah, blah, blah. Like Crisis Core, the feeling is there. Is it perfect? No. But this game was so special to me just because like I felt like I was with the Cloud, Aerith, Tifa, Barrett that I had grown up with. And that was something I was so afraid of. One of my favorite gaming moments of all time, Chapter 3 of this remake, when you get out of the train to Midgard, the slums, and you look up and you see the plate. And I stood there for 10 minutes and looked at it. I'm like, that's what I saw in my head as a kid growing up. You never got a great look at it in 3D, and obviously FF7 was too limited to kind of show it, and Crisis Core and Advent Children were good, but they were still SD. But to see it on the modern hardware and the detail that it was, seeing it, I get whimsical about it. I think they nailed it, and sure, they changed things, and maybe the next one won't be great. Who cares? The first part was great, and to relive that experience and to feel the collective world, fans, people talking, most people really loved it. It was a magical experience for me, and it's why it's one of my favorite games of all time, along with the original and Crisis Core. Last game we're going to talk about today. Everyone knows I put out a video last year. I went through almost all of the Souls games, but years ago at launch, one of the reasons I bought my PS4 is because I wanted this game, Bloodborne. What to say about Bloodborne that hasn't been said? It's one of the greatest games of all time. In terms of overall package, it's probably right behind Metal Gear Solid 3 as like my second or third favorite game of all time. This game got under my skin in a way that few others could. I could not concentrate when I wasn't playing this game because I wanted to play this game. It had RPG elements that I loved. It had action elements that I loved. I love horror, so like of course that was a huge element. The aesthetic, the combat, the gameplay, the secrets, everything. This game just came together, and I will still say it's one of the top 10 games ever made objectively of all time. I don't care if it ever gets a re-release because I got to play it when it was brand new and go through it like 3-4 times. I love all the Souls games. They're all S+ class games, but there's something about Bloodborne where all the pieces come together. There's no fat on this game. There's no part like I don't care about. Maybe like the Chalice dungeons, but there's secrets down there that shocked me, and there's still like things being found down there. Like everything about this game is perfect. It is one of my favorite games of all time, and I think probably the best game on the PS4. And probably the best game of that generation in my eyes in a lot of ways. What can I say? And that's it, guys. Those are my favorite, or at least most of my favorite games, experiences, and series of all time. Now you know who I am. Now you know when you watch those collectors videos, who I am, who you're dealing with, where my tastes lie, all of that. I wonder what you guys think of this. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, what did anything surprise you? Was this kind of par for the course? What do you guys think? So in totality and finality, if I had to say like, all right, what 3 games do you think are not necessarily nearest and dearest to your heart, but like are your 3 favorite like games? I can't make a top 10, and this is nebulous, but like I said, I think Metal Gear Solid 3 is my favorite game of all time, period. I think Bloodborne is a close second, not in a like close to my heart way, but like got under my skin, nailed the style and gameplay, and is everything I want a video game to be. And Bayonetta 3 is right behind that as like the bombastic, what I want out of gameplay and style and energy of a video game. These top three are like my favorite three video games to play ever. But Knights is the one that is closest to my heart. And Sonic is probably the one that's been with me as a series the most. So there you go. Metal Gear is my favorite series. Metal Gear 3 is my favorite game. Knights is closest to my heart. I think the two best video games on their own merit are Bloodborne and Bayonetta. And that's it, guys. That's what that's me. So what did you guys think? Let me know. What are some of your favorites in the comments below? Would you like to see more videos of this? And tomorrow I'm going to choose violence, because today I talked about my favorite games. The next video I'm going to be talking about my gaming hot takes that might make some people mad or may stir some conversation. That's really what the point of it is. Not just to make people mad, but I have some unique opinions as well on games that I've seen some pushback. I want to know, I want you as my audience to really know my opinions, and I'm not going to be mean or nasty, but it could just be a fun thing to do. So please check that out in the following days, and let me know what you guys think. So thank you for joining me on this very long video. My name is Mike. This has been Chip Damage, and please take care of yourself.